Welcome back once again to the Diplomatic Lounge. And today we're going to tackle an issue that seems a bit remote from current diplomacy, but is fascinating nevertheless. Last week, the US state of South Carolina executed an inmate by firing squad. It was the first time in more than 10 years, I think, that this method was used, apparently chosen by the victim himself. But whatever the method, however humane or inhumane, from my point of view, any execution is a barbaric act. And we know that thousands of people die by the gun in the United States every year, but it should not be the government pulling the trigger. Now, when it seems that the death penalty is not, at first sight, a diplomatic issue, there is nevertheless a strong and interesting current about it in European diplomacy. As of the mid-1990s, the EU has waged a worldwide campaign to instate not the eradication of the death penalty, because that would be all too utopian, but to come to a moratorium, means stopping executions, basically. The topic has been coming up for more than 10 years now in the United Nations, and it's interesting to see how the voting pattern there has evolved. At the last opportunity, in December last year, 130 countries voted in favor of the moratorium, 32 against, and then another group of about 30 either abstained or did not participate in the vote. The support for the resolution, that means in favor of a moratorium on the death penalty worldwide, has been growing steadily over the years. But the United States is still voting against it, finding itself on that topic too on the wrong side of history. We know, of course, that the country is full of guns, is gun crazy, and violence is a given in US society. And even when the country was under rational and responsible government, there was nothing much to do about it, much less today. Of course, it's interesting to note that when not long ago the US and the European Union fell out in the General Assembly of the UN on Ukraine, the issue of the death penalty is another one where the West has not been able to stay together. My own experience regarding death penalty diplomacy is related, of all places, to Cuba. As early as 2002, I was part of very discreet attempts to convince our Cuban friends to instate a moratorium. The death penalty had been abolished in Cuba under the 1940 Constitution, but it was reinstated after the revolution, and a great number of executions took actually place. What we pointed out with our discreet diplomacy in the early 2000s was that it was for Cuba a very important public relations advantage compared to the United States if they would stop executions altogether. We were not immediately successful because in 2003 2 executions took place of people that had been attempting to hijack a ferry boat to reach the United States, a rather pathetic act of piracy, but the response was merciless. But after that, the wind started to blow from another angle, and our Cuban friends came around to our point of view that it was a very important propaganda advantage for them to be seen as respecting human rights in that regard, better than the United States. And we saw in the UN votes that Cuba, instead of opposing the resolution, started to abstain. Still, it's a moderate success, but the death penalty is basically not out of the books in Cuba, but it is not carried out anymore. And so, from the point of view of a European diplomat who has spent a long time working in Cuba, this is quite a considerable success. Now, when we look at the worldwide situation, the number of executions, unfortunately, has been going up, and this is somewhat of a paradox. Whereas in the UN, the support for the moratorium grows, the number of executions also grows, because certain countries, China, Iran, North Korea, practice the death penalty on a very large scale. But it's still a pity to see that the United States finds itself associated with those countries rather than with us Europeans. I think we should reflect on this, especially in the current situation in the United States. If it was impossible for us Europeans to influence the situation in easier circumstances, of course, it's pretty much out of the question that we can do it now. Yet we haven't given up. Whenever there is an execution coming up, the EU makes a point of appealing to all authorities involved, and that is mostly state governors, at the very last moment in the hope to prevent the execution. Even if it's not successful, it is a sign of our humane and humanistic diplomacy that we as Europeans can be proud of. Thank you, and see you next time.